I'm Ricardo Juan Ponce. I was born on the 8th of March 1939.
39. And you, Susie?
I'm Susie Ponce, and I was born April 29th, 1939.
Good.
So, tell me, did you grow up in Los Angeles?
Yes.
Could you tell me a bit about where you grew up and whether you were a movie buff or you just went casually or?
Well, my early years were on Zonal and Soto. That's right by the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And then we moved to 64th and Main. In those days, we could look north on Main and see the City Hall.
Mm-hmm.
That was the tallest building in Los Angeles. And of course, in that direction is where all the theaters were. As far as a movie buff, I suppose I did become one in the later years. In my younger years, of course, I was a slave to the family, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to go when they went.
So could you describe what it was like when you went to, your whole family went to the movies? Is that correct, or did? Or?
Okay. Saturdays was shopping day. Mondays was wash day. Tuesdays was ironing day. I think that's the rumor that the soap companies passed. So Saturdays, the big trip was, we didn't have any supermarkets.
Mm-hmm.
So the big trip was to the Grand Central Market in Los Angeles. It was on 3rd and Broadway,
Mm-hmm.
in Broadway.
Still
And it
there.
was, excuse me, and it was right next to the $1 Million Theater, and just a stone's throw from the California Theater.
Mm-hmm.
And so a big outing would be go and shop, and then off to the movies before coming home.
So you would actually go to Saturday matinees? Then?
Yes. And then on those special days, when there was a special showing that we wanted to see, we would go usually to California, and then from there afterwards we would go to Philippe's, which is now by Chinatown.
Mm-hmm.
In those days it was around 2nd or Turner, which again was just a stone's throw from the theater. So and they were open all night, I believe. So that was go to the theater and then go have something to eat over there.
So you
Working
make an
home.
event out of it. And what was
Yes.
the atmosphere like in the theater? Were there lots of families, or was it?
It was, I always remember the theaters as being a family type of theater. And what I remember most about them being a family theater as opposed to our theaters now is that all the children were well behaved. They were as interested in the movies as were their parents, which I don't think is the case now. I know that when I was going to American theaters, that wasn't always the case.
Mm-hmm.
The thing I remember most about those theaters, aside from being family-oriented, is that it was a more relaxed, casual atmosphere as opposed to some of the other big theaters in Los Angeles, like the Los Angeles or Lower State theaters. They were the comparable size theaters, but they were very, I don't want to really say ostentatious, but it was a showplace, and the California and the $1 Million weren't of that
Mm-hmm.
variety. Doesn't mean that they were run down.
Mm-hmm.
They had all the facilities, but they didn't have any more facilities than they needed to.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was mainly my memory of it.
And did you in terms of the program, did you bring food, or did you get the food there, or?
Okay,
And how did the audience react during the films?
okay, it was like you were sitting in your living room, I guess. The one thing I especially remember about the California theater is in those days you had the popcorn concession and the candies. But in the California, they sold ice cream. And I looked forward to having a 50-50 bar.
Mm-hmm.
Vanilla ice cream with the orange outer. That was, for me, that was the big treat. We're going to the theater? Oh, good. 50-50 bar.
Oh, yeah.
What's showing? Oh, I don't know. But 50-50 bar and something. But the films were very good quality. They were different in that the orchestration, the background music, was a little ahead of American films. They had more of a classical concert, large orchestra background as music, more so than the American films. The speaking of the language was more, how can I say, it wasn't as much slang as there was in American films of the era. It tended to be very correct, spoken eloquently, even if it was about a little peasant Indian out in the field. So that made it. I remember I aside from growing up with my grandmother, I got a lot of my Spanish from the movies.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point I remember one of my uncles from Mexico saying that I spoke better Spanish than he did. And I got my Spanish from the movies. Well, I don't know that I could say the same about my English in American movies.
Mm-hmm.
So put that in perspective there.
So, and especially like the $1 Million, they had stage shows. Did they have those
Yes.
in California too,
No.
or no?
No, that was strictly the $1 Million.
And was there stage shows for every show or just for some programs?
I don't quite remember them having it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it was probably only on weekends, and I think mainly it depended on who happened to be in town at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But it was, the last one I remember seeing was, the performer was Jose Feliciano.
Mm-hmm.
He had just started it out. He was a young kid then, and all the Bobby Soxer girls were just screaming their little heads off.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know who he was. I just happened to be there for the movie.
Right.
It wasn't until later that he became famous.
Yeah. Well, you were a boy too, so.
Well, we were
Less interested,
teenagers
right?
then.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And how did you said it was like being in your living room? Did people talk during the movies, or
No,
was
they
it
didn't,
pretty,
but they-
were they
they would take
reverential
their-
or?
They would take their little goodies, their little, like, if we went to the Grand Central Market,
Yeah.
well, we were carrying shopping bags. Shopping bags had food.
Right.
Food gets consumed. And that was not a problem
Yeah.
with the Mexican theaters.
They wouldn't like say no, you can't come in with
That's
your
right.
shopping bag
Yeah,
full
no,
of food
no, they
like they
wouldn't
do
say
in
that.
theaters now.
That's right. But now if I go to one of the theaters down in, I can't remember the theater, the Cinemaplex or something over here in La Cañada, you can get beer and wine.
Yeah.
That's something new.
Yes.
So they're catching up.
Mm. And are there any particular films or film genres that you remember that you were enamored with, or you like better
I don't
than
know.
others?
I don't know if I can call it enamored,
Yeah.
but there is one that stuck with me all my life, and that was a movie called El Túnel 6. It was about tunnel number 6, and it was about a bunch of miners that are trapped when there's a cave-in in the mine,
Mm-hmm.
and how they take to knowing that they're going to be rescued, but probably not in time, and they range from in all ages, but there's this one young kid that is probably 12, 13 years old, and this was his first going out, so to speak. And so there was an older miner that tried to protect him, and as they were losing air and had no food or anything to drink, they were starting to drop like flies. And so in order to save this boy's life, the man cut his wrists and let him sustain himself on his blood. And I thought that was so dramatic. You'd never see that in an American movie.
No,
Never
I don't
ever.
think so.
And I don't think you'd see it now. So anyway, that was one that stuck with me. And of course, all of the Cantinflas movies, those were big.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I still look for them every now and then, every chance I get. If I see them on television,
Mm-hmm.
I'm glued to it. And then, of course, there were the female actresses that I remember. And
Like Maria Felix or?
Maria Victoria,
Mhm.
Maria Antonieta Ponce, Maria Félix, Dolores del Rio, Libertad Lamarque.
Mm-hmm.
She was in Argentina.
Argentinian, Argentinian, yeah.
And of course, all of the cowboys, half of the movies were probably cowboy movies
Mm-hmm.
or thereabouts.
And do you remember, did they change their program like every week or every few days or?
I don't remember. It seems to me that it was changed during the week, like every Wednesday or
Mm-hmm.
every Thursday. But probably also a function of what the movie was and whether it was a new release, whether it was a fairly popular movie, whether it was bringing in the bucks.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, it was pretty regular. You could depend on it
Right.
changing it at the same time of the week
Yeah.
every week.
Did you see El Rancho Grande in reruns? Because I know that film played all the way through the 50s in Mexican theaters.
Allá en
No.
el Rancho Grande con Tito Guizar. Allá en el Rancho Grande.
We must have seen that.
We must have.
Yeah,
Must have.
Tito
We
Guizar
saw
was
most
so,
of
yeah,
his movies.
yeah, forgotten about him.
But you know who Tito Guizar?
Oh, yes.
We interviewed his daughter.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, actually, right in the neighborhood too.
Right here? Oh my
I mean, in
gosh.
Pasadena,
In
but
Pasadena.
up in
Oh,
the
that's
hills.
interesting.
Oh, that's great.
Mm.
Well, I just recently found out that Wyatt Earp was living in our area here,
Mhm.
somewhere in Southern California when he died.
Hmm.
And he was, and John Wayne got to meet him.
Hmm.
Tidbits that
Yeah.
you'd think I would have known about, and just before I go now, the whole folk things that come about.
And so, when did you go to any other theaters other than the downtown theaters, or only the downtown
For
theaters?
Spanish movies?
Yeah.
No, we just went to the downtown. Excuse me. We had two local neighborhood theaters, but they didn't show Mexican or Latin movies,
Mm-hmm.
so it was downtown.
Mm-hmm. And when did you see this disappear?
Well, let's see. There was a transition there. The Orpheum Theater was another American movie house that was a show place.
On
And-
Broadway? Yeah.
Yes, I believe it was on Hill. The Orpheum, yeah, I believe it was on around 9th and Hill, 8th and Hill.
Maybe, I can't remember.
And they started showing Spanish movies.
Mm-hmm.
They quit their other routine, went to Spanish. And that was probably around the very early 60s. The Mayan Theater was a theater that we didn't normally frequent and that is still around. It's turned into a nightclub, I believe. And it seemed that the film populace went from the California, which was on Main, over to Hill and Olive and those areas.
Uh-huh.
And that would have been around the 60s.
Well, at the same time, then you have Spanish language television coming in
Yes.
too, right?
Yes. But by that time, we weren't big moviegoers anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So that had a lot to do with it. Had we still been moviegoers, we might have had a better handle on just when it disappeared or started to disappear. But I think it suffered the way that all theaters did.
Yeah.
With the television coming in, everybody would much rather look at a 9-inch round tube with a big magnifying glass in front of it to make it look like a 10-inch than to spend 15 cents
Yeah.
and go watch it on a big screen.
But you say you still do watch Spanish, Mexican films
Yes.
on
Oh, yeah.
television now, right?
Yes.
When they're on.
Mm-hmm. I tend to be a little more selective. I'm a science fiction addict,
Mm-hmm.
so that occupies most of my free watching time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Susie, if you could tell us a bit about your background.
Okay, I was born and raised in Los Angeles. My grandparents were from Mexico and from the state of Jalisco, and they came during the Revolution as my husbands. They just wanted to escape that bad time in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, our parents were educated here, and as well as us, of course.
Did you speak Spanish in your
Yes, I did. My grandparents, we lived together with my grandparents. My father passed away because he was a victim of a hit-and-run driver, which killed him. So
home?
my mom was left as a single mom with myself and my brother to support, and it was a blessing to have my grandparents to help my mom. And so I would say that Spanish was our first language. And so then as we got closer to attending school, then my mom spoke to us mostly in English. And I guess that's why she gave me the nickname Susie. You know, my real name is Maria Susana, but she always called me Susie. And yeah, we were very proud of our heritage, very, very proud. And so, you know, I just felt very lucky that I was of Mexican descent, but then of course being American too, that made me also so very proud. And we, on the weekends, I would go with my mom and to the California or to the $1 Million, and it was a big treat. It was just a really fantastic treat. The neat thing about the California, it had a little hamburger stand right next door. So we could either eat there, you know, before going in, or take our little lunch and eat in the theater. And just as my husband loved the 50-50 ice cream bars, that was my special treat too. The movies that I really loved were with Pedro Infante. He was, first of all, I just loved his voice. And the movies that he made were just so much about real life, you know. And I believe there was a movie called Nosotros los Pobres. Yeah, and that was one of my favorite. They were tearjerkers, but you know, we would come out. I just remember my mom and I saying, "Wasn't that a good movie?" And we had been crying and crying in the theater, you know. But they were just great. Dolores del Rio, of course, she was, you know, one of my favorites, along with Maria Félix, and there was a really cute little lady I can't remember her name. She always played the grandmother,
Sara Garcia.
Sara Garcia, and she was just adorable. And you could really, as a young kid, I could really relate to her because she was just as sweet as my grandmother. And we also shopped at the Grand Central Market, especially my grandfather, and we would, well, he didn't go, my grandfather wasn't a movie buff, so he'd come home, but I would go to shop with my grandmother or my mother or my uncle, you know, and watch these wonderful movies. And Cantinflas, of course, was the big attraction. And one thing about the California, I believe it was the only theater that had, or maybe the $1 Million as well. They would have these little, like a raffle, and you go to get a ticket, you know, as you enter the theater, and they would have these different little prizes. That was a big attraction for a lot of the people, you know. Mm-hmm. They would give household items such as, you know, a set of dishes, mm-hmm. something like that. I have one girlfriend that told me that she was able to go backstage and to one of the live performances at the $1 Million, and she got to meet the performer, and that was the biggest treat of her life. I can't remember the name of the performer. Let's see. It was just, as my husband said, a very relaxed atmosphere, and you were there to truly be entertained. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was just a relaxing atmosphere. You see a good movie, and sometimes
you didn't consciously decide I'm going to go because of this movie. You just went whatever was showing, right?
Yes. My mom or would make the decision, but mm-hmm. I think we were happy with just about any film, mm-hmm. because we knew it would be a good movie, just a good movie.
And did you in any way keep up with like the stories of some of these stars or something like that, the way teenagers keep up with Hollywood stars and their lives, or mm-hmm. was it just watching the movies and focusing on the movies?
Just watching the movies, yeah. Just watching the movies. And I did get to one of the big events. Was still very young, I guess. Maybe I was about 18 or something like that. I went to Bullock's department store mm-hmm. in Los Angeles, and just as I was going toward the elevator, and I see Maria Félix walking toward me, and I thought, wow. And she was, yes, she was beautiful, very petite, very slender, had a very elegant suit. And I think she saw, I was just kind of mesmerized. I was kind of going toward her. My mouth dropped, I think. And she just kind of, gave me a quick little look and went off to do whatever she had to do. Mm-hmm. But that was a big treat for me. I loved all of the singing, and Dolores del Rio, how she would portray the indigenous people. I mean, that was also really fascinating for me. We used to Tintan. Tintan was another popular
comedian.
Yes, comedian.
When you say Dolores, how she portrayed the indigenous people,
yes.
Is it because maybe in American movies you wouldn't see those type of representations, like right. indigenous people with actual stories?
Yes.
Could you explain that? Could you say that?
I would just. It was just, I saw such gentleness, whereas in the American movies, the Indians were always the bad people, and in her very humble ways, as she portrayed an Indian, she was just so artistic and so articulate, and that was just to me very, I don't know, just a very inspiring, very very lovely, So that was a good role model as a young little girl, to see that gentleness and that beauty. And because a lot of people, in Mexico, I think, and well, anywhere in the world, I suppose, people still look down on the lower class, you know, and it's just, you know, I find that very disturbing, very disturbing. I don't think we should look at people as individuals and see their beautiful talents, no matter what shape, color, whatever, you know, whatever they do, whatever their social status is. So,
Now, a lot of the music that showed up in these films was also then sold as records and was available on the radio and stuff like that. So, I mean, people were aware of that, and they would.
yes.
Were you also into listening to the music, popular music?
We would listen to the radio most of all. We didn't have a big, because, I mean, we had a very low income, so we couldn't spend money on records. But my grandfather would always have music on, you know, from, you know, Mexican music. But he did love the opera. He just absolutely loved the opera, and he would stand in front of that radio and conduct, which was just adorable. So, yeah, and also he was just a very gentle person, very artistic. Yeah, I just was very blessed to come from such a family. But yeah, that was going to the theaters, you know, to California, the $1 Million, the Orpheum.
Do you remember Martin Becerra?
I know that name.
He was
and
like the host of the $1 Million. He would come on stage.
Yes, I know the name.
He also did radio.
Did radio.
Martin Becerra. And he had a partner with whom he would sing songs. Martin.
Oh, yeah, you know, I know the name.
Okay.
I know the name, but I can't.
But do you remember a host on stage presenting the shows at the $1 Million?
I know there was a host, but it's been so long ago that I have forgotten. Yeah, forgotten.
You mean you can't remember what happened 60 years ago?
Unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay, so you met in a movie theater?
Yes.
At the Paramount
Yes.
on 6th.
Yes, and the Paramount was just a really nice theater, and they had little steps down. We must have been sitting at the balcony or the second level, and mezzanine was it? Yeah. So my girlfriend and I were walking, and as I'm trying to go down the little steps, I fell. I tripped. You came to my rescue. Is that?
I was the catcher.
He was a catcher. So he caught me for life.
You're the hero.
Yes.
Yes, I was.
And when was that? How old were you then?
Is that 15? We were both 15.
I was 15.
Wow. We're just a month apart in age.
I was 16. My wife was 15. No, I was 15, you were about to turn 15.
Yeah.
1954.
Yeah, so
54, yes.
Wow.
So that's a long, long time.
And it was love at first sight.
Well, yeah, yes, I think it was.
I think it was more like infatuation at first sight.
Yeah, at first sight.
And looking
we
later.
were so young. You know?
Of course.
And but since that time.
How long did you wait before you got married?
5 years.
5 years, yeah.
So
you finished school and...
Yes. So we were married at a very early age, yeah.
Mhm.
Well, at that time, 20 was not too early. I mean,
No.
that was kind of the normal,
Mhm.
the normal age. And yes, so we
Do you remember what movie it was?
Gee, I can't remember that at all.
No, I didn't pay attention.
After that, you didn't even pay attention to the movie, right?
No. Well, that was secondary.
We used to, since we grew up in LA, and we used to go to Clifton's for dates. Yeah, I think that was probably one of our first dates, going to Clifton's, and we would go on weekends go to the movies. And at that time, that's when we started seeing American movies more than Mexican movies. Because so.
If there was a good showing at the California, we'd go over to the Grand Central Market, and on the Broadway side, they had sold shrimp, among other things, but they had the shrimp as a popcorn shrimp or as a butterfly shrimp. And they put it in a little cone. So we do a little shopping and take a little cone of shrimp and off to the theater.
Yeah, it was fun. It was really a lot of fun growing up in LA. And we, you didn't have a car, of course, he was so young, and of course everything was public transportation, or we walked.
But there was better public transportation back then than there is now, right?
Yes.
I mean, there were still the red cars.
The red cars, and the Watts car. We lived in on 21st Street. My family, that's where my family lived, and there was a little section very close to downtown LA, but it was a really neat community because it seemed that all of the families in these neighborhoods were also from Mexico, and a lot of them came from the general area that my parents came from. So so we all went to school together. We went to church together. Neighbors knew each other. It was just really, it was like living in a little town. Yeah, well, yeah, but yes, I mean, we were poor, but we were so rich in everything that we had. It was really neat. Surrounded by a big city, and just knowing everybody, it was safe to go out and play and everything. So.
And did that get urban renewed out of existence, or what happened to them?
Well, yeah. What happened is that they started a lot of factories started to move in, and a lot of the people moved out eventually as the kids grew up. They moved out. My mom was the last to leave. My mom with my stepfather, and they had purchased a house next door. They were the very last ones in that neighborhood, and it was all purchased by big companies. That wasn't the biggest. The biggest company there was Prudential Lighting, and the owners there bought just about all of the property there, just because they were expanding and they wanted parking lots and all of that stuff. But they were the very last to move.
But the public transportation, as I say, we lived on 64th and Main, and the streetcar ran on Main Street, the old car. It ran from Florence all the way to Lincoln Park. And for a dime, you could go to Lincoln Park. And of course, it stopped right in front of the California Theater. So for 10 cents, you can go to the California Theater.
Yeah.
Which was really neat. And the traffic wasn't bad. Not like now. So.
Oh no. Yeah. This is nothing like now. It was just a beautiful era that we grew up in.
Well, I mean, it's funny. I heard a report about in the 20s and 30s and into the 40s, LA had the best mass transit system in the world.
Is that right?
For an urban urban environment, literally the most efficient.
I can believe it.
And then, after World War II, the city fathers sold it down the river to the auto car companies, and they killed it.
Yeah, just it was.
It's really dumb.
Yeah. There's been.
Well, as long as there were rails and streetcars, there was no competition from cars. And so it was fairly constant. You could pretty much count on within 5 minutes of where you're going to land at any one given time.
Yeah.
But when they went to buses and the bus had to contend with other motor vehicles, that changed. And that was the beginning of as far as I'm concerned, it's a downfall. We still have buses, but they don't work as well as the rails did.
No.
Well, one place we've got to mention Olvera Street.
Yeah.
And that was just, really neat place, and we would go on a regular places to go to Olvera Street, and just to hang out, just to go for the food. And Rico's uncle was a chef at La Golondrina, which was a very popular
Consuelo de Bonzo.
Mhm.
You're so,
Yeah.
yeah, very well
She,
informed, yeah.
She gave him a job when he was just a teenager, and he developed into the top chef. And she was very politically inclined, and so he cooked for mayors and governors, and a lot of the Spanish film personnel would go to the Golondrina. It was the in place to be. So we got to go, and we got sneaked in, we got free food packed on the table, so to speak. And I said, you know, that once was a very nice lady.
Mm.
Well, those were days way past.
Mm-hmm. It's I mean, now we're doing this exhibit also and this program, which is funded by the Getty, because Los Angeles now, after how many decades, is now a majority-speaking, Spanish-speaking city again.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's why all of a sudden now there's this kind of remembrance of the Spanish-speaking culture in all phases that was here and then was more or less forgotten. Although obviously it wasn't really forgotten because you are alive and there are many like you who of course remember it.
Yes.
But I'm talking about in terms of like the mainstream and the press and some kind of the cultural memory of the city as it's expressed in media.
Well, in
was
those days,
virtually no
there were
memory of it.
pockets
Yeah,
throughout the city.
yeah.
There were pockets of these, like my wife's little community there was like a pocket
Mm-hmm.
surrounded by, in those days, industry. When we moved to 64th and Main, it was predominantly an Italian neighborhood. And so there really wasn't, we were the exception, we weren't really a pocket. We were sort of part of other Latin community, other Latins.
Yeah.
Latins, not just Spanish speaking,
Right.
but French and Italian. We're all considered Latins,
Mhm.
as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way I was brought up. It's a language.
But now you didn't necessarily speak Spanish in your home, did you? Because you were
Yes,
saying you
yes, I
learned
was-
Spanish in the movie theaters, or
Mhm.
did you learn it at home too?
I learned it at home too. I was brought up by my grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
We all lived together, my grandparents and my uncle and of course, my mother and father. And everybody would go off to work. My mother was working in those days. So my grandmother had stopped working and it took care of me. So with my grandparents, I always spoke Spanish.
Yeah.
I never spoke anything but Spanish.
Same with me, yeah.
But with your friends your
With-
age, you
with
would
my
speak
friends,
English?
We spoke English.
Yeah.
Yeah, same here. And I started to get, kind of, unfortunately, kind of lose the language if you don't, we speak to each other in English most of the time,
Mhm.
And because my parents needed caregivers toward the end, the last few years, then we were fortunate enough to find some really nice Mexican ladies to take care of them, and so then it was, that was really neat too, because then it was like a continuation of learning my, Mexican background through them. I learned
Mhm.
about, where they were from, and I started to speak Spanish again, and it was really neat,
Mhm.
it's neat. Because a lot of my friends have actually, because of lack of practice, have forgotten a lot of Spanish words.
Mhm.
I also should mention too that La Placita, the Catholic, church in downtown, and the original,
Mhm.
they did a lot to keep that Spanish culture going, keep the heritage going, and the love of being what we are, where our families came from.
Yeah.
And it was very important, and
Yeah.
very, very important to our upbringing.
So they have services in Spanish and
Oh,
in
yes,
Spanish
yeah.
and all that. And,
Yeah.
yeah.
And they still do. As a matter of fact, now the parishes here, there's 3 Catholic parishes here that now prepare food on a regular basis, weekly basis, take it down to La Placita, and there are a lot of people there that gather, to eat, and it's so nice. I was really impressed with these people that said it was a very dignified thing. They, of course, were waiting for the food, but they all, a lot of them got up to help set up the tables, to help to serve each other. It's so nice. It is just so nice, and I'm so happy that our parishes here are helping those that just are so needy. And they're not only of Mexican descent, but from various other,
Right.
Latin American countries.
Of course. Now, I mean, many more people from
Oh, yes.
south of Mexico, Central America. Any more questions, Alejandro?
Do you guys, can you remember like the title of one of the earliest movies that you saw in Spanish, unless you remember the first one? Do you remember the experience of going to see a movie in Spanish for the first time when you didn't really understand much? Or was it very fluid?
It was very
Well,
fluid.
I can give you a lot of titles.
Give me a few. And you remember the year that you began
One of them
going?
was called.
Were you 5 years old or 10 years old? How old were you? What year are we talking about, and what theater did you start going to see the movie?
Well, we went till the 60s.
But when do you start?
Probably
When
fairly
do you
early.
start?
I can't remember. I was in the womb at the time. Probably from very young.
Yeah, the same here with me, but at a very
I was
young
so
age.
young that I was flabbergasted. I couldn't talk.
So in fact, families would bring very toddlers and very small children, even if they,
Yes.
and no one minded that, of course.
No one seemed to. I never had any complaints. It was just but yeah, we were just there to watch the movie, and I don't remember any screaming or kids crying. Maybe on a very rare occasion if the baby was.
So
very
give me a
small.
couple of movies are your
Oh,
favorite and why?
Maximo Tepa was a movie about sort of like a cowboy movie, where this young boy's family was abused and killed, and in the town was a tree, a zapote tree, that was just starting out, growing, and so when he was ousted, he swore that he would be back the day that the tree gave its first zapote. So that would be the day that Maximo Tepa would return to the town. That was one of them. I have so many titles and they all elude me right now.
At the moment you need them, I know it happens to you all the time.
So if to somebody that doesn't know anything about Mexican films, why do you think Jorge Negrete or Pedro Infante were charismatic, yet so different?
Well, when they portrayed a character, as my wife mentioned about one of the female actresses, the Indian wasn't always the bad guy, and the poor were only poor because they didn't have money. It wasn't a homeless type of being poor. It wasn't an Indian that grunted, It was an articulate Indian, and it was an articulate poor person, and they were only poor because they didn't have any money, but not poor of spirit. So there was always a spiritual message, and each of these actors had their own way of portraying it and carrying themselves as if they were that character. And they would do something to elevate that character. So that is the thing that made a lot of them, gave that charismatic, you know, in the movies, they were the good guy, the one that helped all of the little children and the women, or they were the bad guy that would walk into a bar and could have a fight. They would fight without having blows.
Mm-hmm.
They would have, because they were singers, they would have a mariachi behind them, and they would sing a song that, in other words, it was like taking verbal blows at their opponents, and then of course the opponent would then have a different mariachi, and they would sing their verbal blows back,
Right.
and they could go on like that throughout the whole movie, and so that was a way of showing that there's more than one way to make a point, more than one way to win, without having to come to blows.
Do either of you remember when either Pedro Infante or Jorge Negrete died? Because they both were so young. I mean, Negrete died in '53 and Infante, I think, '56.
Now, Negrete died in Los Angeles. He was about to debut at the $1 Million.
Oh,
And he died here.
I don't know
From
that.
cirrhosis.
Oh my gosh.
He was married to Maria Felix at the time.
Oh, he was married to Maria Felix? No,
Yeah.
that I didn't know. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So you, since he spoke about Jorge and Pedro, what do you? What is there on a movie that you remember, or a special character from a movie?
I think I mentioned it before. It was
Dolores?
Nosotros los Pobres. Yeah, and oh my gosh, it was so dramatic. And I remember this one scene where I think that there was a fire in the home, and Pedro runs in and tries to rescue the child, and I believe the child had died, you know, and it was and he's crying, of course, and I mean the audience was just sobbing. Yes, I mean really, it was such a touching scene. I mean it felt as if you were living. I mean it was you on the screen living that experience, and with Jorge Negrete, I just think of him as just, I mean, I liked him too, but I remember his big hat, his big black hat, and his singing, and being charro, I guess, you know. But he wasn't he didn't affect me as much as Pedro Infante. Yeah, there was something about Pedro.
Pedro was more, he was a military guy in the past, and he was an opera singer, and highly educated, whereas Pedro was more down to earth of the people.
If you asked for memories of Jorge Negrete, I would have to respond with ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching,
oh yeah,
ka-ching,
yeah,
ka-ching.
that's right.
That's the sound of his spurs.
Yes, yeah. Yes, I had forgotten
Yeah,
about
you knew
that.
where he was coming from, but the sound of the spurs, ka-ching,
Yeah.
ka-ching.
Yeah, I had completely forgotten about that. Yeah, that was very impressive. Those
I'm on your
songs.
side. I always loved
Yeah.
westerns.
He didn't play the officer in the military.
I got embarrassed watching all these people crying. I was a 13-year-old boy, 12-year-old boy. Of course he did.
Yeah.
You know, I've got to tell you about Ricardo Montalban. I just loved him. Has he passed away?
Like 3 years ago.
Just
He's
recently, yeah.
going to preserve a movie called Sombra Verde with
Yeah,
Ricardo.
Oh.
I believe the first movie he made in Mexico, because Ricardo began his career here, like Dolores.
Yes.
Dolores began in Hollywood.
I didn't know
And
that
then
she
went
belonged,
back,
and then
yeah.
went back. I do remember seeing her.
And Ricardo the same. And I
Oh.
think Sombra Verde is like one of the first that he makes in Mexico after his.
1954. Yeah.
Well,
Color
there's a
film.
movie called Sombrero. Have you seen that? And that I love that movie because that took me back when I saw it. My husband had seen it for many years ago, and he searched for researchers, found it. So we saw it, and it just really took me back because it was just like being a kid again, watching one of those really neat movies. The only thing that was a little bit odd was the Italian actress. She's very cute. The one that plays the unmarried girl that it wasn't Ricardo.
Pierre Angeli.
Yeah,
Pierre.
Pierre Angeli.
Yeah, you know, and I was wondering why they had selected her, you know, with all the other Mexican actresses. You know, I mean, she was really cute and everything.
And of
but-
course, Yvonne Ricardo was in it.
Oh yeah, Yvonne de Carlo, yeah, she was.
And Dina
But-
Foch.
Yeah, they had a lot of in that particular movie, Sombrero, they had a lot of the actor, I don't know what you want to call them. I don't think they're B movies, but I remember seeing a lot of actors that I had seen in Mexican movies. I can't remember their names.
Yeah.
But yeah. But I'm glad. I think that movie should be shown more, Sombrero, because it's really. I mean, it's fun.
It was one of the first movies to actually be shot in location in Mexico.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Movies weren't being shot on location very much in those days. A lot of them were done in soundstage.
That's
That
true.
movie, although it was made by an American company, all the money came from Europe. Trying to think.
Are you talking about the 30s?
No, this is Sombrero. I
Sombrero.
mean, that was an international production because it had Pierre Angeli and Vittorio Gassman.
Yeah,
was in
that's
it,
someone else.
Yvonne
That's
DiCarlo,
it.
Sid
Yeah.
Charisse.
Such
Yeah.
yes.
So,
So,
Yeah,
Nina
I forgot
Foch,
that.
you got right. Kurt Kasner, who was German. I mean, it's
Yeah.
Thomas Gomez.
Such.
But André Solar was in it, who was big in Mexican films. And,
The Soler family, Andrés Soler.
Mhm.
yeah, and lots of others. You're right. All of the smaller roles seem to be all
And,
Mexican
and
actors.
being shot in Mexico, there were a lot of Mexican performers that in their own had appeared in various number of movies, and they were typed as certain types, and they came out in Sombrero. They were used in the movie.
Hmm.
There's an actor. Actually, they were twins, and they would they would always come out almost all the time in the Cantinflas movies. And there was one movie in which this actor, I can't remember, it was the old guy with gray hair and wrinkled, and he was a smoker, and he played the devil in this one movie, which was hilarious. But and then he would in other movies he played priest or different characters, and I can't.
Is it Garaza?
I
Because
can't-
Cantinflas made many movies with Garaza, who was a Spanish actor. Skinny tall. Oh man.
Yeah, maybe that was it. And was he a twin?
I'm not
See,
sure.
I
about that.
I wasn't aware of that until one of the ladies that took care of my mom told me, and she said, "Oh, they're twins."
But you see, Cantinflas, once again, the character that represents the humble people, and with his skills of Cantinflas, how he defends himself
Yes.
against injustices of the powerful. So yeah, that thing is very strong in the Mexican films. As you were saying, representing the humble, the intelligence of the poor class.
Yes.
Yes.
That's what Cantinflas was.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And also I think the melodrama, which American people say, oh, melodramas. Actually, melodramas are in a way very realistic because a lot of families, immigrant families, go through a lot of heavy struggles.
Oh yes.
So when you went to see those Mexican melodramas, you didn't think it was exaggerated. It was real life.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
And I think that's
It was-
part of
it
our
was a
Latin
different-
culture. We like to go and cry.
Yes.
Where Americans like to focus on the shiny side of life, but I think we have something with
The American movies had a different way of entertaining people. In Mexican movies, you went to be entertained, but not so much entertained by just sitting there and being a non-participant, but as being drawn into the movie and becoming one with what was going on in the scene. You were participating in visually putting yourself there and being able to relate to the different characters.
Mhm.
An example of where you participate is in radio. You use your imagination. It was like reading a book, but you were listening instead. And if they would describe a scene very briefly to go along with what the program was about. If they told you that there were 1,000 Russians coming at you from the left or something, in your mind you would see 1,000
Mhm.
characters there. And so in the movies it was pretty much the same. It painted a picture for you to be part of, and that's the way you were entertained.
Mm.